Racist cops handcuff and falsely accused black man of stealing yacht, then a helicopter appears. Marcus had always been a man who believed in working hard and celebrating life's little victories. After years of struggling with late nights, small paychecks, and endless rejections, he had finally reached a point where his small business was thriving. For him, this moment felt bigger than just success. It felt like proof that his patience and resilience had finally paid off. He had promised himself that when this day arrived, he would do something special, not just for himself but also for the people who had stood by him through thick and thin. That's why he decided to rent a yacht for the weekend. It wasn't about showing off or pretending to be something he wasn't. For Marcus, it was about creating a memory, one that his friends and family could carry forever. A sunny day at the marina, laughter floating across the waves, and the thrill of stepping onto a yacht for the very first time. The morning of the trip, Marcus woke up earlier than usual. The excitement buzzing inside him didn't let him sleep for long. He chose a crisp white shirt, ironed trousers, and polished shoes. If anyone was going to doubt that he belonged on a yacht, he wanted to make sure his appearance spoke louder than their assumptions. He carried with him a neat folder containing all the documents, the rental agreement, his ID, and the payment receipt. He knew the world didn't always treat people like him fairly, so he had learned to come prepared for everything. When Marcus reached the marina, the sun was bright, casting sparkles on the water as if the ocean itself was celebrating with him. Boats of all sizes were lined neatly, their ropes tied securely to the wooden docks. Seagulls flew overhead, calling out as if to announce the arrival of another day of adventures. Marcus paused for a moment, taking it all in. He wanted this day to start with gratitude, to remind himself how far he had come. He spotted the yacht at the far end of the dock. Sleek and shining white, it looked almost unreal. The company had told him it was one of their finest rentals, big enough for a small group, comfortable enough to spend the night if they wanted. Marcus smiled to himself, already imagining the laughter of his friends echoing across the deck, the clinking of glasses, and the simple joy of watching the sunset on open waters. He adjusted his folder under his arm and began walking toward the yacht. That was when he noticed two police officers standing near the dock. At first, he didn't pay much attention. After all, it was common to see officers around marinas for security. But soon, he realized their eyes were fixed on him. They weren't casually scanning the area, they were following his every step. Marcus tried to remain calm. He had done nothing wrong, and everything he was doing was legal. He told himself not to let their stares ruin his day. Yet, the uneasiness grew as he reached the yacht and placed his hand on the railing. "Excuse me, sir," one officer called out, his tone sharp, not curious. Marcus turned politely, his natural instinct always being respectful. "Yes, officer." "What are you doing here?" the officer asked, walking closer with his partner. Marcus smiled lightly, trying to ease the tension. "I've rented this yacht for the weekend. I'm just getting things ready before my friends arrive." The second officer narrowed his eyes, glancing at the yacht and then back at Marcus. "You rented this?" he asked, as if the idea itself sounded unbelievable. "Yes," Marcus replied calmly, holding up his folder. "I have the paperwork here if you'd like to see it." Instead of taking the folder, the first officer folded his arms and gave Marcus a look filled with doubt. "Mind telling us how you can afford something like this?" The question stung, not because Marcus didn't have an answer, but because he knew what lay behind it. He took a slow breath, reminding himself not to let frustration take over. "I've worked hard for it," he said simply. "And I decided to treat myself and my friends." The officers exchanged glances. Their suspicion didn't soften, in fact, it seemed to grow. They asked him more questions: where he lived, what kind of business he ran, why he had chosen this yacht. Marcus answered each question patiently, showing no anger, no resistance. All the while, he kept the folder extended toward them, hoping that one of them would take the documents and put an end to this uncomfortable moment. But they didn't. Instead, one officer walked around the yacht, scanning it as if looking for signs of forced entry, while the other kept questioning Marcus. Inside, Marcus felt a deep sadness mixed with disappointment. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of his life. He wanted his friends to arrive and find him standing proudly on the deck, welcoming them with joy. Instead, he was standing under suspicion, being treated like someone who didn't belong. Still, he told himself to stay calm. He knew that losing his temper would only make things worse. He tightened his grip on the folder and waited, silently praying that the situation would resolve before his friends arrived. But as the minutes passed, the officers' questions became less about curiosity and more about accusation. Their voices grew firmer, their tone harsher. Marcus looked out at the water, at the sparkling waves that had seemed so full of promise only moments ago. He thought about the years he had spent building his business, the sacrifices he had made, the nights he had gone to bed with nothing but determination to keep him going. He thought about how this day was meant to honor all of that. And yet, here he was, standing on a dock, having to prove that he belonged in a place he had worked so hard to reach. When a small group of strangers walking by noticed the scene, Marcus felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment. He didn't want to be seen this way, not when he had done nothing wrong. He wanted to stand tall and proud, not appear like someone under investigation. But no matter how politely he explained, the officer's suspicion lingered like a cloud that refused to move. The sound of his friends' laughter reached the dock in the distance, signaling their arrival. Marcus's heart tightened. He had dreamed of greeting them with excitement, but now he worried they would walk into a scene of misunderstanding and tension. The officers stepped closer, one of them finally reaching for his folder. Marcus handed it over quickly, his heart racing, hoping the documents would speak the truth louder than he ever could. As the officer flipped through the pages with a skeptical expression, Marcus kept his gaze on the horizon. The day wasn't ruined yet, he told himself. He still had hope that everything would turn around. But deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he had anticipated. Marcus stood silently while the officer flipped through his folder. His heart raced, not because he had anything to hide, but because of how the officers were treating him, as though every word he spoke was just another lie. He thought once they saw the official papers, things would get better. But the expression on the officer's face told a different story. The officer raised the folder, squinting at the documents. "These could be fake," he muttered, shaking his head. Marcus's chest tightened. "They're not fake, officer," he said calmly. "You can call the company right now. Their number is on the papers. I booked this yacht days ago." The second officer stepped closer, his tone sharp. "We don't need you telling us how to do our job. We've seen tricks like this before." Marcus swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. The sun that had felt so warm earlier now seemed harsh, burning against his skin as the officer's words cut deeper than the heat ever could. Before he could respond, one of the officers reached for his wrist. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked shut around him, the sound echoing louder than the seagulls overhead. Marcus's eyes widened. He had never in his life been in handcuffs. The humiliation swept over him like a heavy wave. "Wait," Marcus said quickly, his voice still steady but filled with urgency. "There's been a mistake. Please. I haven't done anything wrong." But the officers didn't listen. They turned him around, placing his hands firmly behind his back. People nearby stopped walking, their curiosity pulling them closer. A few took out their phones, recording the scene as it unfolded. Marcus lowered his head, his pride aching. This wasn't how today was supposed to be. This wasn't how he wanted to be seen, not by strangers, and certainly not by his friends who were now just steps away from joining him. "Sir, you're being detained for suspicion of theft," the officer declared loudly, as if speaking to the crowd more than to Marcus. The word theft hit Marcus like a slap. He wanted to shout, to demand they check the truth immediately, but he knew raising his voice could only make things worse. Instead, he took a deep breath, forcing himself to speak as calmly as possible. I paid for this yacht. Please, check with the rental company. I have done nothing wrong. One of his friends, James, rushed forward, his face filled with shock and anger. What are you doing? This man rented the yacht. We were all invited. He has the papers, check them. The officer gave James a cold stare. Step back, sir. Unless you want to be taken in too. The crowd murmured, whispers rising into words of disapproval. That's not right, someone said softly. Another voice chimed in, he showed them papers. Why aren't they listening? Marcus could hear every word, each one mixing with the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The embarrassment cut deeper than anything else. He had worked his whole life to be respected, to stand tall, and now he was standing in handcuffs, accused of something he would never do. James refused to back down. He turned to the onlookers. You all see this? They're handcuffing an innocent man for no reason. His voice carried across the marina, and more people began recording, their cameras pointing straight at the officers. Marcus lifted his head slightly, catching the eyes of a young woman holding her phone. She gave him a small nod, as if silently promising, we see you. We know the truth will come out. That tiny gesture gave Marcus a flicker of strength. The officers, however, seemed unmoved. They spoke into their radios, reporting confidently that they had caught a suspect attempting to steal a yacht. The words stung Marcus like arrows. He felt his dignity slipping further away, replaced by a heavy shame he did not deserve. He tried again, his voice quiet but firm. Please, officers. Look at the contract. Call the owner. I'm begging you, don't make this mistake. But the officers didn't budge. Instead, one of them tugged on Marcus's arm as if preparing to walk him away. The clinking of the handcuffs echoed with each step. His friends protested, stepping forward, their voices rising in anger. This is wrong. You can't just take him away without proof. The officers barked at them to stay back, but the crowd's voices were growing stronger now. People were shaking their heads, whispering loudly, recording everything. The tension on the dock felt like a storm about to break. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, trying to hold on to calm. He thought about his parents, who had always told him to stand with dignity no matter what came his way. He thought about his younger cousins, who looked up to him as a role model. He thought about how, even in this moment of pain, he couldn't let himself lose control. When he opened his eyes, he spoke again, louder this time. I am innocent. I rented this yacht legally. I have done nothing wrong. His voice carried across the marina, strong and clear. For the first time, the crowd clapped softly, their support rising like a tide. Someone shouted, let him go. Another yelled, check the papers. The officers glanced at each other, their authority beginning to feel shaky under the weight of so many witnesses. But still, they kept Marcus in handcuffs. The yacht sat quietly behind him, shining in the sun, as if waiting for the day it was meant to give him joy. Instead, it had become the backdrop to his humiliation. Marcus's heart ached, but he refused to let despair win. He looked up at the clear blue sky, silently asking for strength. Deep inside, he believed the truth would find its way out. He just didn't know how or when. As the crowd grew larger, the air was filled with voices, some angry, some shocked, some supportive. The officers tightened their grip on Marcus, their stubbornness refusing to bend. And then, in the distance, the faint sound of something unusual echoed across the sky. At first, it was just a hum, almost like the rumble of a faraway engine. People turned their heads, squinting at the horizon. The sound grew louder, pulsing through the air like a drum beat. A helicopter was approaching. The crowd pointed upward, distracted for a moment by the unexpected sight. The officers paused, their radios crackling in the silence that followed. Marcus lifted his head, the wind from the approaching blades already reaching his face. He didn't know what it meant, but something inside him told him this moment was about to change everything. The deep thumping sound of the helicopter grew louder with every passing second. The blades cut through the sky, sending gusts of wind across the marina. People shaded their eyes with their hands, looking up in surprise. The officers holding Marcus stopped for a moment, glancing upward with the same puzzled expression as everyone else. Marcus lifted his head too, feeling the strong wind tug at his shirt. His heart raced, not from fear this time, but from a strange sense of hope. Something about the sudden arrival of the helicopter made him believe the scene wasn't going to end the way the officers expected. The helicopter circled once, lowering steadily until it hovered just above the marina. The noise was overwhelming, but it also silenced the crowd in its own way. Everyone watched as the side door slid open, and a man stepped out, crouching against the rushing air before moving down toward the dock. The man was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, his presence commanding attention even before he said a word. His expression carried both confidence and urgency, as if he already knew something wasn't right. Some of the crowd gasped in recognition. "That's Mr. Hamilton," someone whispered. "He owns half the boats around here." Marcus's eyes widened. He had heard the name before. Mr. Jonathan Hamilton, a wealthy businessman who was known in the city for his vast collection of yachts and properties. And suddenly, Marcus remembered. The rental company had mentioned the yacht belonged to a private owner who occasionally lent it out. This must have been him. Mr. Hamilton strode toward the scene, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Marcus in handcuffs. His steps quickened, his voice rising above the fading roar of the helicopter blades. "What on earth is going on here?" he demanded, his tone sharp. The officers straightened, clearly unsettled by the sudden appearance of a man who held obvious authority. One of them cleared his throat. "Sir, we were detaining this man for attempting to steal your yacht." Hamilton's face hardened. He glanced at Marcus, then back at the officer. "Steal my yacht," he repeated slowly, his voice carrying disbelief. "Do you even know who this man is?" The officers looked confused. One shook his head, while the other muttered, "He had papers, but we suspected they were fake." Hamilton stepped closer, his voice cutting like a blade. "Fake? Those papers were issued by my office. This man," he pointed at Marcus, "rented my yacht legally. I personally approved it before leaving town. And now I return to find him in handcuffs, humiliated in front of a crowd. What explanation do you have for this?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some people clapped, others shook their heads at the officers. Cameras caught every second, the scene now even more powerful than before. Marcus felt his breath catch in his chest. Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with a flood of emotions: anger, sadness, and exhaustion. He had told the truth from the beginning, yet no one had believed him until now. One officer tried to defend their actions. "Sir, we were only doing our duty." He didn't look like Hamilton raised his hand sharply, cutting him off. "Careful what you say next," he warned. "Because whatever excuse you think you have will only dig this hole deeper." The officer fell silent, his face red with embarrassment. Hamilton turned to Marcus, his expression softening. "I am deeply sorry you had to endure this. You did nothing wrong." Marcus nodded slightly, his throat tight with emotion. He wanted to thank Hamilton, but the words stuck for a moment as the reality of what had just happened sank in. "Take those handcuffs off him immediately," Hamilton ordered, his voice firm. The officers hesitated, but under Hamilton's piercing gaze, they quickly unlocked the cuffs. The sound of metal releasing was like music to Marcus's ears. He rubbed his wrists gently, the skin sore where the cuffs had pressed. The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering loudly. Phones were still raised, capturing every detail. Marcus stood straighter now, his dignity slowly returning, though the pain of what he had endured remained. He looked at Hamilton and managed to say, "Thank you." Hamilton nodded, his eyes filled with both anger at the officers and sympathy for Marcus. "It's not me you should thank. You earned the right to be here. You did everything properly. The shame lies with those who treated you otherwise." The officers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with the crowd, who were openly criticizing them now. "Unbelievable," someone said loudly. "They didn't even check properly before humiliating him." "This is why people don't trust the system," another added. Marcus's friends rushed to his side, relief flooding their faces. James clapped him on the back. "We told them, Marcus. We told them you were innocent." Marcus gave a faint smile, though his eyes were still heavy with the weight of the experience. "I know," he said quietly. Hamilton looked at the officers one last time. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers," he said coldly. "I won't let this slide. You've not only insulted an innocent man, but you've also embarrassed this entire marina by your reckless actions." The officers mumbled a weak apology, but it was clear no one around believed it was enough. The helicopter still hovered in the background, its blades whipping the air. It stood as a symbol of how dramatically the scene had shifted in moments. What had started as Marcus's humiliation was now a public exposure of injustice. Marcus took a deep breath, finally free. But deep inside, he knew this moment would stay with him forever. The feeling of cold steel on his wrists, the shame of being accused without proof, the sting of being judged before being understood, it was an experience no one should have to live through. Yet, in the middle of that pain, something unexpected had happened. The truth had arrived, descending from the sky like a storm that clears the air. And because so many people had witnessed it, the story wouldn't just disappear. As Marcus stepped onto the yacht at last, his friends following close behind, he glanced back at the crowd. Dozens of eyes were still on him, many filled with respect now instead of suspicion. Some gave him small nods of encouragement. Others shouted words of support. Marcus raised his head high, reminding himself that no amount of humiliation could erase the truth of who he was and what he had achieved. This was his day, and though it had been stolen for a while, he was determined not to let it be destroyed completely. The yacht rocked gently beneath his feet, steady and strong, just like the resilience he carried inside. The sun glimmered on the water again, this time reflecting not just light, but also a sense of hope. Because Marcus knew this was not the end of the story. It was only the turning point. The marina had grown quiet again after the helicopter lifted back into the sky, but the silence was not peaceful, it was heavy, filled with tension. People stood in groups, still holding their phones up, whispering to one another about what they had just witnessed. The truth was finally out, and everyone knew it. Marcus stood on the deck of the yacht, his wrists still red where the handcuffs had dug into his skin. He rubbed them gently, not to erase the marks but to remind himself that they were finally off. Beside him, his friends tried to comfort him, but his heart was still heavy. The humiliation hadn't simply disappeared with the removal of the cuffs. It lingered inside him like a shadow. Mr. Hamilton remained near the dock, facing the officers. His voice was sharp and unwavering. "You owe this man an apology. Not just for detaining him without reason, but for the way you treated him as though his words and documents meant nothing." The officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the crowd that still surrounded them. They knew every second was being recorded, every gesture captured. Their badges, once a shield of authority, now felt like a spotlight of accountability. One officer cleared his throat. "We made a mistake," he said flatly, his voice almost too low to hear. Marcus turned, his eyes locking on the officer. "A mistake," he repeated softly. He wasn't shouting, yet his words carried across the dock. You called me a thief in front of all these people. You put me in handcuffs even when I showed you proof. You didn't see me as a man who followed the rules. You saw me as someone who couldn't possibly belong here. Is that just a mistake? The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others crossing their arms in disapproval of the officers. Hamilton stepped closer to Marcus and placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't need to justify yourself to them. The truth speaks for itself. But Marcus wasn't done. He took a step forward, standing tall in front of the officers, his voice calm but steady. I want you to understand something. This wasn't about me renting a yacht. This was about how you chose to see me before I even opened my mouth. You didn't give me the chance to explain. You assumed the worst. And that assumption could have destroyed more than just this day. It could have destroyed my reputation, my dignity, everything I've worked for. The officers stood stiffly, unable to respond. The crowd was silent now, hanging on to Marcus's every word. He continued, his tone still controlled, but his eyes full of quiet fire. You didn't just doubt me. You ignored the evidence in my hands. You ignored my voice. You ignored the truth because it didn't fit the picture you had already painted in your minds. That's what hurts the most. The marina was so quiet that even the soft splashes of water against the dock seemed louder. Hamilton looked at Marcus with admiration, almost as though he saw in him a strength far greater than money or status could ever buy. Well said, he murmured. Finally, one of the officers muttered, we apologize for our actions today. But Marcus didn't let it end there. He shook his head slightly. An apology is words. And words are not enough when actions have already done the damage. I don't want this to happen to anyone else. I don't want another person to be humiliated the way I was simply because someone refused to see the truth. The crowd erupted into applause, some cheering Marcus's bravery for speaking up. The sound echoed across the water, wrapping around Marcus like a wave of support. For the first time that day, he felt less alone. James stepped beside him, smiling proudly. That's the Marcus we know. Always standing tall. Marcus gave a faint smile, but his eyes remained serious. He wasn't speaking just for himself anymore. He was speaking for every person who had faced unfair judgment. Hamilton addressed the crowd, his voice carrying authority. What you witnessed today should never have happened. But because it did, let it be a reminder that we must hold those in power accountable. No one should be treated as guilty before being given the chance to prove their innocence. The crowd clapped again, some raising their phones higher, determined to share this moment with the world. The officers stood in silence, their faces pale. They had no defense left. All they could do was endure the weight of the truth pressing down on them. Marcus turned back toward the yacht, placing his hand on the railing. The smooth surface felt steady under his touch, almost grounding him. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the salty air. The day had started with hope, then fallen into humiliation, and now it was climbing slowly back toward dignity. His friends gathered around him, their smiles returning little by little. The yacht's still waiting, one of them said, trying to lighten the mood. Marcus chuckled softly. Yes, it is. And we're not going to let today's darkness take away our light. They all climbed aboard, their laughter cautious at first but growing stronger as the tension eased. Marcus glanced back one last time at the crowd. Many people waved at him, some shouting, "We're with you." Others gave him thumbs up or words of encouragement. The yacht engine hummed to life, and as it slowly pulled away from the dock, Marcus stood tall at the front, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The water sparkled again, reflecting the sunlight in a way that reminded him of hope. Yet, deep inside, Marcus knew this wasn't just about a single day or a single mistake. It was about something bigger, something that stretched far beyond the marina. The videos being shared, the words spoken, the truth revealed in front of so many witnesses, this moment was going to ripple outward, reaching places he couldn't even imagine yet. He whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." The yacht cut gracefully through the water, carrying Marcus and his friends into the open sea. The wind brushed against his face, cool and refreshing, as if nature itself was applauding his strength. Behind him, the marina grew smaller, but the impact of what had happened there would only grow larger. Marcus didn't know exactly what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: he would not let his pain be wasted. He would turn it into something that mattered for himself, for others, and for change. And with that thought, he lifted his chin, ready for whatever came next. After the incident at the marina, life didn't simply return to normal for Marcus. Though he had regained his freedom and dignity that day, the memory of the humiliation and false accusation lingered in his mind like a shadow he couldn't easily shake. He thought about how close he had come to being treated as a criminal for simply living his life, for renting a yacht he had paid for legally. It was a hard lesson about how appearances could deceive people and how quickly assumptions could lead to injustice. The next morning, Marcus woke to find his phone buzzing constantly. Messages from friends, family, and even strangers poured in. Videos of the incident had gone viral overnight. The clips showed the officers questioning him aggressively, the moment he was handcuffed, and then the dramatic arrival of the helicopter and Mr. Hamilton. Every detail was captured, and millions of eyes were now witnessing the story he had lived. At first, Marcus felt overwhelmed. He never wanted attention in this way. He hadn't asked for the world to watch him being humiliated. But as he read the messages, he realized that something important was happening. People weren't just watching, they were talking. They were discussing fairness, justice, and the way assumptions can destroy lives. Some were outraged at the officer's actions, while others were inspired by the calm courage he had shown. He began responding to messages, thanking people for their support, but also sharing his own reflections. He wanted the conversation to go beyond outrage. He wanted it to reach understanding, education, and change. Marcus realized that this painful moment could be transformed into a platform for awareness, for teaching others that everyone deserves respect and fairness, regardless of how they look or where they come from. The local news stations picked up the story quickly. Anchors replayed the footage, discussing the incident with guests who specialized in social justice and community relations. They highlighted how Marcus had remained calm and respectful, even when accused unfairly. His dignity in the face of humiliation became the center of every report. The police department faced immediate scrutiny. Internal investigations were launched, and statements were requested from every officer involved. Social media campaigns began demanding accountability, calling attention to the larger issues of bias, assumptions, and the importance of treating every person with fairness. Marcus watched as the discussions spread nationwide, and while he didn't seek the spotlight, he understood the value of using his experience to highlight systemic problems. Several community organizations reached out to Marcus, inviting him to speak at events, workshops, and schools. They wanted him to share his story, to inspire others to stand with dignity, to teach young people about courage in the face of unfair treatment. At first, Marcus was hesitant. Public speaking had never been his comfort zone. But then he realized that staying silent would allow the story to fade without impact. If he spoke, he could turn pain into progress. His first speaking event was small, held at a community center. He stood in front of an audience of 50 people, nervous but determined. He recounted what had happened at the marina: the initial excitement, the false accusation, the handcuffs, and the relief brought by the truth. He spoke not with anger, but with honesty, emphasizing how important it is to recognize prejudice, question assumptions, and always seek evidence before judgment. People listened intently, many nodding along as he spoke. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. Several young people approached him, sharing their own experiences of unfair treatment. Marcus realized that his story was now giving others a voice, showing them that they weren't alone and that dignity could be maintained even in the darkest moments. Over the next few weeks, the story continued to spread. News outlets followed up with interviews, and Marcus's calm, thoughtful responses won the admiration of many. He used each opportunity to advocate for fairness, equality, and respect. He urged law enforcement, institutions, and individuals to examine their biases, to treat every person with humanity, and to remember that assumptions can destroy trust and relationships. The officers involved were placed on administrative leave during the investigation. Their actions were criticized widely, and many community members demanded changes to training and accountability measures. Marcus didn't focus on revenge or punishment, he focused on reform. He wanted the attention on positive change, not on resentment. Mr. Hamilton, the yacht's owner, became a supportive figure in Marcus's journey. He publicly praised Marcus's patience and composure, emphasizing that the real problem lay in assumptions, not in Marcus's character. Hamilton's statements added weight to the discussion, reinforcing the idea that injustice can be confronted respectfully and that allies in positions of power can make a difference. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his work and personal life, but his perspective had shifted. He was more aware of the ways society can be unfair, and he dedicated himself to speaking out whenever he could. He realized that his experience had given him a responsibility not just to himself, but to others who might face similar situations. He began writing about his experience online, sharing reflections about dignity, fairness, and resilience. His posts gained attention, and many readers commented about how his calm strength inspired them. Marcus also encouraged dialogue, asking people to consider how they might react in difficult situations, and reminding everyone that empathy can change outcomes before conflicts escalate. Over time, Marcus became a small but significant voice for social awareness. His story was used in workshops, online discussions, and even training sessions for organizations wanting to address bias and assumptions. People who watched the video of his experience were reminded that truth, patience, and courage could confront false accusations and prejudice more powerfully than anger alone. Despite the attention and the support, Marcus never lost sight of his personal joy. He returned to the marina several times, this time without fear, enjoying the yachts and the water with friends and family. But each time, he remembered that day vividly, using it as a reminder that fairness and respect are precious, and must be protected every day. Looking back, Marcus understood that the incident was more than a personal challenge, it was a turning point. The false accusation, the humiliation, and the public exposure had given him insight into both society's flaws and its potential for good. It showed him that when truth prevails, and when people act with dignity, even the darkest moments can become a platform for change. And so, Marcus carried on. He celebrated life's joys, continued building his business, and spoke whenever he could about fairness and equality. His story became more than an isolated event at a marina, it became an example of courage, integrity, and the power of standing tall even when the world seems determined to judge unfairly. In the end, what had started as a day of humiliation and false accusation transformed into a story of hope, justice, and awareness. Marcus learned that while injustice can strike unexpectedly, truth and resilience are stronger than fear and false assumptions. His voice, calm and dignified, reminded people everywhere that fairness is not just a principle, it is a responsibility that belongs to everyone. Through it all, Marcus never sought fame or recognition. He only wanted to ensure that no one else would endure the same humiliation without hope. And in that, he succeeded not just for himself, but for countless others who would hear his story, feel its truth, and find the courage to stand tall in the face of injustice. Sparkle's word count, 1310.